Order, order.
Terrorism, Protection of Premises Bill.
We are now sitting in public and the proceedings are being broadcast. And before we begin, I've just got some rules just to announce. Hansard colleagues would be grateful if members could email their speaking notes to hansardnotes@parliament.uk. Please switch electronic devices to silent. Tea and coffee are not allowed during sittings. Today we will consider the programme motion on the amendment paper. We will then consider a motion to enable the reporting of written evidence for publication and a motion to allow us to deliver evidence sessions. In view of the time available, I hope we can take these matters formally and without debate. I first call the Minister to move the programme motions standing in his name, which we discussed yesterday by the Programming Subcommittee of this bill.
I beg to move the resolution in my name. I'm delighted to serve under your chairship, Dame Siobhan. I look forward to detailed discussions on the provisions in the bill with my honourable friends on these benches and with honourable members and right honourable member opposite. At the second reading, there was extensive agreement of the merits of the bill across the House, not least from honourable members now serving on this committee. I welcome that and trust we will continue in a constructive spirit during committee proceedings. I believe that the resolution before us provides the committee with enough time to scrutinise this important bill, and I would invite the committee to agree this resolution.
The question is that the programme motion, as on the amendment paper, as many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I call the Minister to move the motion about written evidence.
I beg to move the resolution in my name.
The question is that the motion is as on the amendment paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Copies of written evidence which the committee receives will be made available in the committee room. I now call the Minister to move the motion about deliberating in private.
I beg to move the resolution in my name.
As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now go into private session to discuss lines of question. Before we start hearing from the witnesses, do any members wish to make declarations of interest in connection with this bill? Okay. We will now begin hearing oral evidence. Can the witnesses... Oh, no, they can't introduce themselves, they're not here yet. I would like to welcome our first witnesses this morning and to say on behalf of myself and the committee how delighted that you are our first witnesses and to congratulate you on all your efforts relating to this bill. I would be grateful if you could introduce yourselves.
Okay. My name is Figen Murray. I'm the mother of Martin Head.
And my name is Burnham Cox and I'm one of the co-founders of Survivors Against Terror and have worked with Figen on Martin's Law.
Thank you. Before calling the first member to ask a question, I should like to remind all members that questions should be limited to matters within the scope of the bill and we must stick to the timings in the programme motion the committee has agreed. This panel will have until 10 a.m. I call the first member to ask a question, the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Can I extend a very warm welcome to you both and offer the thanks to the committee for your evidence this morning. Can I also take the opportunity to reiterate the tributes that I paid to you both at second reading? It is incredibly impressive and inspiring, the work that you've done, and I know that the whole committee and the wider House are hugely grateful for it. Can I begin at the beginning and ask you both to say why you think we need this legislation and what the impact of it will be? Thank you.
This is the point where I read this. So I've taken the liberty to write something down that I'd like to please read out, if that's okay.
Yes.
And hopefully that'll address some of it. So I want to begin by saying thank you to absolutely every person who has had any involvement in bringing Martin's Law to this point in the proceedings. It's been a long 5.5 years since the campaign started, and the kindness and support people have extended us has been quite incredible. As I sat in Parliament on 14th of October for the second reading, I realised that the relatively long journey that still lies ahead with all the different steps the legislation still must undergo will not be an easy one. During this reading, my name was mentioned many times. Many lovely words were said, but I need people to really understand that I would not have progressed much without my co-campaigners and the campaign team and the incredible support of my husband and my remaining children. 7.5 years ago, our life as a family was destroyed forever. I want you to note the word forever, as there is no coming back from this. As a family, we are damaged goods. The day Martin died, something died inside all of us. Don't get me wrong, as a family we are very close. However, individually, we all carry our separate emotional scars that are now an integral part of each of us. This will be the case for every family anywhere in the world who has been hit hard by terrorism, and our numbers are sadly growing. Whilst outwardly I function at a high level day in, day out, make no mistake that my heart is in shreds. Yet it's my broken heart that actually drives me to try and stop others from ever having to feel this way. Coming back to the second reading, I was buoyed by that every party said they supported this bill. If security can't unite us, what can? And I welcome the all-party support. During the second reading, I also heard some concerns around getting the balance right and keeping the bill proportionate. I agree with that. We said right from the start that one size does not fit all and that the bill needs to be proportionate. It has never been intended to be burdensome. My worry is that the increase in the threshold from 100 capacity in the draft to 200 now risks getting that balance wrong and excludes too many venues. The cost to businesses for Martin's Law is a drop in the ocean compared to the 43 billion euros that the Rand Corporation estimate that terrorism cost the UK between 2004 and 2016, or even the £100,000 lost by Mr. Fred Foster, a market trader at Borough Market during the attack in 2017. However, we need to be clear that the risk from terrorism is real. Our terrorism threat level currently stands at substantial, meaning an attack is likely. Whilst there have not been any successful terror attacks, it is easy to let complacency creep in. We must also not forget that attack methodologies have changed. People get radicalised and then go out and use vehicles, knives, homemade IEDs to kill others. There currently are around 800 active investigations, around 2,500 subjects of interest who are being watched by authorities as they are linked to terrorism investigations, the aforementioned 800. But there are a further 30,000 individuals who have expressed extreme views that could lead to committing acts of terrorism. These figures have not changed over recent years. The geopolitical situation sadly also means that extremists exploit the current conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza to try and recruit more people to follow their ideology. There is no sign of these figures reducing in the near future. The Director General of MI5, Ken McCallum, has also recently spoken about 43 near misses since 2017. These are 43 planned attacks that were stopped just in time. Everyone in this room surely must appreciate that sooner or later an attack will not be stopped on time and people will yet again die, get injured or traumatized. There is no room for complacency. The threat is out there and it's real. Terrorists do not care who they kill. They aim to kill, shock and gain notoriety. We have had attacks such as a planned knife attack on an LGBT community in the Cumbria, a knife attack against an MP inside a church hall in Essex, a bomb outside Liverpool Women's Hospital, another bomb at a hospital in Leeds, a knife attack in a park in Reading, a knife attack at a conference in London, a knife attack at a high street in London, a firebomb attack at an immigration centre in Dover, a letter bomb delivered to a Scottish university, a knife attack at a railway station in Manchester, a vehicle attack at a mosque in London. If anyone thinks that where they live is too small or too rural to be targeted, you are wrong. Our experience in this country and around the world shows us that terrorists can strike anywhere. A lot of venues are already busy preparing and implementing as much as they can. Manchester have trained over 2,500 people in free of charge face-to-face ACT training, and businesses and venues across Manchester are implementing the legislation as best as they can. Venues in Manchester are doing this voluntarily because the city was badly hit. People here in Manchester understand the risk as they were directly affected, but we need this legislation in the statute books, as without it, people will simply not take security seriously. Security is often seen as low priority, as people do not believe their venue is at risk from terrorism. A recent tabletop exercise in Manchester for the standard tier venues resulted in most venues saying that the cost of implementing measures is either negligible or very low cost or effort, and that it enhanced customer experience as people felt safer. During the second reading, a few people worried about liability and responsibility given to volunteers. Anybody who already has any responsibility for organising or managing community spaces and events already have these liabilities under civil law. Martin's Law won't create additional liabilities, they exist already. What Martin's Law is more likely to do is to help communities know that they are discharging those responsibilities properly. Volunteers in various venues across the country already voluntarily take on responsibility for fire safety or health and safety, and again, this would be simply a small add-on. Martin's Law is asking people at the standard tier to understand how to lock down, how to evacuate, how to evacuate, or how to communicate with others. It's as simple as that on the standard tier. Another concern was around churches and schools. Our children have the right to be protected from harm, and most schools already have lockdown procedures in place anyway, long before Martin's Law became a topic. Places of worship are a place where people of all faiths should be able to worship freely and without fear. They need to be protected. We have seen attacks on places of worship across many countries, such as Sri Lanka, Christchurch, New Zealand, France. Since the Gaza conflict, a lot of synagogues are currently on high alert as the threat is understood. To sum up, Martin's Law will save lives. Terrorism is here to stay. The public have a right to be kept as safe as possible when they are out and about enjoying the freedom our country offers. Martin, Safi, Nell, Sorrel, Edith, Megan, Olivia, Georgina, Courtney, Philip, Kelly, Elaine, Alison, Lisa, Michelle, Wendy, Jane, John, Angelica and Martin, Chloe and Liam were all out enjoying a great evening that night and had every right to be safely back at home. I absolutely believe that had Martin's Law been firmly established, they would still be alive now. Please consider what is the right thing to do. I finish by saying once again, it's time to get this done. Thank you for listening.
I'll just add a couple of things to that. I think Figen has said it out incredibly powerfully. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm part of something called Survivors Against Terror, which is a network of about 300 survivors of terror attacks, people that have been bereaved, like myself and Figen, people that have been injured themselves in attacks. And what draws that network together is a desire to reduce the likelihood of future terror attacks and to reduce the harm that they do. And we do that by campaigning for the rights of families, to things like mental health support, to things like compensation, educating the public in terms of the role that they can play in being part of the the fight against terrorism, and then also campaigning for effective laws that make terror attacks less likely in the future. And that's how Figen and I first started working together right at the start of this campaign. And I got involved in it for two reasons. Firstly, frankly, being inspired by Figen and her determination to make something good come out of something that was absolutely horrific, and to make sure that no other family goes through unnecessarily what her and her family have. But also fundamentally because the methodology of terrorism has changed. As Figen mentioned, the age of very complex attacks, which are often directed by people from outside the country, involving the need to assemble a device or work out how detonators work, gave our security services lots of opportunities to intervene and disrupt those plots. When we're now in an age where people are just using knives or cars, the way that we respond to that terror threat hasn't caught up. It is impossible for our security services to keep our country safe with this new distributed methodology, and therefore we have to have much more of a partnership approach, which is how can we all play a little role in making each other safer. Now, what we don't want to do, and I think this is comes from our experience, the network of survivors who are behind and supporting Figen and her campaign, the reason they're doing that, it's not out of sympathy. We don't want anybody's sympathy. What we want is to make people safer so that this doesn't happen to anybody else, and the impact that it's had on our lives doesn't happen to anybody else. And there is nobody more driven in wanting to defeat terrorism than those who have been directly affected by it. And there's two ways that terrorists can win. One is by killing people and maiming people, and the other is by disrupting our way of life, making us live in fear, change our way of engaging with each other. And that's why right from the start, proportionality has been central to this thinking. We don't want this to change our way of life. We don't want terrorists to win either by injuring people or by changing our way of life. And that's why right in the heart of this proposal from the beginning has been proportionality. We want everybody to be empowered to play a small role in making us all safer. We do not want airport-style security outside village halls, as some of the papers might suggest we want. The final thing I'd say is that nobody wants to have a law named after their child. What we do want to do is to make sure that no one goes through unnecessarily what Figen and her family has, and we do want to make sure that there is a legislative response to the clamour of action that you've had in every inquiry post-2017, whether that's into Manchester, whether it's into the London attacks, to say this is a loophole that has to be closed, and now is the moment to close that loophole.
Can I ask Shadow Minister?
To be honest, I had the great privilege of meeting Figen and Brendan over many months on this, so I have no questions.
Thank you, Chair. Can I reiterate your comments on the admiration we all hold for Figen and Brendan and for the campaign that they've done? Figen's a constituent of mine. I know we're all very proud of her in Macclesfield. Can I ask you, Figen, what do you think is the most important element of this bill in your view?
I think that as many places as possible are covered. We're actually, as a campaign team, concerned about the threshold, if I'm honest. I live in a small town, it's more like a village, and with the 100 threshold, that was originally the case, quite a few of the restaurants and the little theatre we have and the pubs would have been covered under the law. With the change in the threshold, my little town is now not coming into scope at all, so it's completely not secure under Martin's law. So it concerns me, and the change from 100 threshold to 200 is now excluding about 100,000 premises, which feels quite a lot, actually, that are now no longer needing to be within that scope. Worries me.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you both for coming, and I echo the words of everyone else this morning so far. Could I ask, are there any recommendations from the Manchester Arena inquiry that this bill would not address?
Well, the Manchester Arena inquiry obviously recommends Martin's Law as one of the recommendations. And if I remember Sir John's words, it's a matter of urgency that it is needed. I think he referred to training, and he also referred to, which is not covered in Martin's Law under the standard tier, certainly not, he recommended that people have life-saving training as well. That's not for debate in Martin's Law at the moment, but certainly training, the ACT training was kind of part of the recommendation.
I think just to add to that, I think the other thing that has been amazing, I think you're hearing from Mayor Andy Burnham later on, but has been the extent to which Manchester has already started to operationalise some of this. So I think when we're having the debates about proportionality, some of the real experiences of businesses who are already implementing this, it's worth really digging into that conversation, because I think what that shows is, in this case, lots of businesses who fall below the threshold are voluntarily taking part in the training, starting to implement Martin's Law, because they know that it gives them better, like, who doesn't want their venue to be more safe from terror attacks? It's something that organisations in general want to do, and that's why we're seeing the adoption of this ahead of the legislation being published, even by venues that won't be covered by the capacity legislation.
Can I see any other members with questions? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yes, of course.
Thank you. Can I just ask a bit more about the reaction of organisations that do fall in scope? Can you tell us a bit about what their experience has been, any teething problems that they've had, and how they've adapted in Manchester as they've implemented it?
So we had in Manchester a tabletop exercise that Nick Aldworth and I were allowed to witness. They invited us in, and they gave us the results of that tabletop exercise. And during that, we had there were medium-sized businesses and small businesses, venues and businesses, even under the scope. And the feedback they got was implementing Martin's Law would actually be either no cost or low cost, and that it would enhance, in a lot of cases, customer experience because people felt safer, and that the most onerous thing in some people's opinions was to ask their staff to do the 45-minute free of charge ACT e-learning training that basically just they had to pay 1 hour's staff wages. But on the whole, they felt it was good, and the staff felt better having that knowledge because they felt better equipped to deal with the crisis. And in fact, some of the venues were also saying they do regular real-life practice of lockdowns, for instance, at some of the venues in Manchester. For some reason, Manchester have really embraced it. They actually... a few years ago, I got called into a council meeting, and they basically said, we want to support you. What can we do? And I just looked at them and said, don't wait for the legislation, just do it anyway. And they did, Manchester did, and they worked together with Counter-Terrorism police and put on the free of charge once a month 3-hour ACT training, face-to-face, and they're always oversubscribed. They're very well attended.
And I think that the fact that it has been taken up so strongly, I think does belie some of the sort of the idea that this is a huge burden on businesses. Of course, with any methodology like this, you can come up with a costing in terms of how much the opportunity cost of doing X, Y, or Z is. You can do that, you've got the big public campaigns around see it, say it, sorted. Of course, there's a cost with that. You could measure that cost through the amount you spend on it, the opportunity cost of the things that people could be doing while they're listening to it, the distraction cost. There's a whole way that you come up with, frankly, a very big figure. But the reality is that is a proportionate response to what is a very substantial threat when it happens. Our threat, as Figen mentioned, is substantial at the moment, and that is the proportionate response, therefore, that we're trying to come up with. So in the conversations and the implementation of this in Manchester, I think one of the reactions that we've got, and this is a broader reaction from the public as a whole, is, doesn't this already exist? You know, I think the public would expect that public venues would have an obligation to keep you safe. You have an obligation on the temperature you need to keep food at. You have an obligation for the number of toilets you have. You have an obligation to fill your tax return. That you don't have any obligation to keep your often paying customers safe from a very substantial threat, which is judged substantial by the government. That is a massive loophole, and that's what this bill, I think, helps to fill.
I see no further questions unless I'm missing somebody. In which case, can I thank both witnesses for your contributions this morning, and we will move on to our next guest, who is Andy Burnham.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. For this oral evidence session, we have until 10:20. Can the witness please introduce himself for the record?
I'm Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. As colleagues will know, I left Parliament in 2017, and that was 2 weeks before the attack at the Manchester Arena, so I've been closely involved with all of the developments ever since.
Could I call the Minister?
Good morning, Andy. Welcome
Morning,
back.
Minister.
It's always very, very good to see you. As the Mayor, perhaps I should call you Mr. Mayor, but as the Mayor, you are obviously uniquely well placed not only to understand the impact of the Manchester Arena bombing, but as is often the case in Greater Manchester, you've been a real trailblazer in terms of looking at what the impact of Martin's Law might be on business. So I wonder if you could say something about what you think the impact of this bill would be on businesses based on your experiences in Greater Manchester.
Thank you very much, Minister. So before I get to the question, if I could just say a little more about sort of my background that's led me up to what I think. I was Shadow Home Secretary at the time of the Paris attacks and the Bataclan in particular. And I think if that had happened here, I think this legislation would already be on the statute book. Obviously, as Figen said, we've lived through the terrible events of the 22nd of May 2017, but in the 7.5 years since, the nature of the threat has changed. And I don't think we could have imagined some of the incidents that we've seen since then. Obviously, the terrible loss of a really loved colleague in Southend, the attack in Southport. I mean, we would not have expected that. I remember asking Theresa May at the time of the Paris attacks, you know, were we prepared for an attack in an English city? Well, even then we were only thinking cities. We weren't thinking outside of cities. So I say that just because, you know, all of that has kind of shaped my thinking over the years. When Figen first came forward with the concept of this bill, I took time to think it through with colleagues in our city region. We are one of the we're part of a group called Resilient Cities. It's a group of 100 cities around the world. We're in the Strong Cities network, so we're constantly sharing best practice with cities around the world. And it was our view that this was a real gap, the lack of a clear set of standards for security in our venues. We were, though, conscious there maybe there would be an impact on venues, and hence it had to be right but also proportionate in terms of the measures that were brought forward. And I think care has been taken over that. As you've just heard, Manchester City Council have done an exercise working with venues and surveying venues as to some of the voluntary things that have already been done in our city region, and the impact is negligible or low cost, was what you heard a moment ago. But also a report that they think it's raised standards generally within the organisation. It's improved the visitor experience, and that matters a lot to us, Chair, as a city region. The experience that people have when they visit, the sense of safety that they have when they're in the city, and we are working to raise that. So for us, it's always been, we've gone ahead, and we're if anything, we want to keep going further and raising the bar. And I guess I'll finish by saying my main message to this committee this morning is I would ask all of you, please, to ensure that this bill is not watered down any further. And actually, I would say, I would look to this committee to strengthen it again. I do believe venues from 100 capacity to 200 should be covered by this bill. I don't think it's right that within the standard tier there's no requirement for training. I think there should be a requirement for staff to take the free ACT training. So really the message from Greater Manchester is, we're not just we support Figen, obviously, and we support all of the families, and continue to do, who lost loved ones on that night. So in one way we're doing it from that emotional reason, and we always will, but we're also doing it from a resilient cities perspective. We believe this will only strengthen people's experience in our city. For parents whose kids come into our city to go to the many events that take place every weekend, we think it's in their interest that they understand there's a basic level of security at all of the venues across our city region.
Tim Rocker, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I ask about how businesses have reacted as Manchester's led the way, and how onerous or not onerous they found it? What's the practical experience?
Well, it's a fair question, and of course we've had those conversations. I've been at events with Figen, actually, with our nighttime economy advisor Sasha Lord, where we've said, look, we think we should do this, and then there's been those conversations in the room. Well, it's difficult, the hospitality sector has had challenging times, but as we've talked it through, I think people have come round to the idea that security and safety is one thing that no venue should compromise on, because in some ways that's the first thing to get right, and if you get that right, then you'll get lots of other things right. And it is about the industry, if you like, raising the standard of what it does. And I think the Manchester visitor economy, I know it's not far from your constituency, and I know you probably know it well. I think there is evidence that it has improved over the years, and it in many ways mirrors the type of offer that people can find in London. But we have a nighttime economy advisor because we want to keep raising the bar. We're not complacent at all. And there just hasn't been a sort of outcry and a backlash. People have worked with it. This attack happened in our city. We lost 22 young people. 20 young people mainly, but of other ages as well on that night. It is incumbent on us to challenge ourselves about what we do as a city to respond to that, and also recognising that life is changing, and that the outlying towns and villages of Greater Manchester could see an incident of this kind. I think there's a broader point here. I don't believe yet, and I'm speaking as Police and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester, that the country has got all of its procedures in place to face what we're experiencing, and I say that with reference to fire and rescue services. Currently, it's still not clear what the role is of fire and rescue services in relation to what's called a marauding terrorist attack. Now, how can that be the case? That clearly needs to be addressed. So, we've done local things, but this legislation should only be the start, in my view, of really ensuring that there are arrangements in place, providing clarity blue light services, venues and others around basics of responding in an incident. And I think there's still work in progress on that point.
Lindsay Farnsworth.
Thank you. It's clear that in Manchester the approach has been very collaborative with business, with local authorities and with the community. I just wondered if you have any thoughts in relation to guidance that could be given to local authorities in relation to this bill and going forward.
It's a really important question. The guidance I would want to see would be to begin to ask them to have a nighttime economy strategy. I think it's really important for a whole host of reasons. So it's not just obviously the most serious attacks. We see concerns around spiking or unacceptable treatment of women and girls, a whole range of issues that I think need to be addressed. And I think if we want to have the levels of safety that we would all want to see in our country, I think there has to be a more serious look taken at some of what happens within the nighttime economy. For me, that would include ending out-of-area taxi working, for instance. We have a situation in our city region right now where if you go into city centre Manchester, pretty much any night of the week, but certainly on Friday, Saturday, you will see hundreds and hundreds of taxis with a Wolverhampton plate. And you're nodding, which suggests, and others are, that other places see this. That can't be in the interest of public safety to have taxis licensed 100 miles away. What I would say to local authorities is we need to start calling for change around public safety on nights out. And that would include arrangements at the local authority level to ensure that taxi drivers are adequately licensed, and that the relevant criminal records checks are done at a local level and they are not undercut by something happening a few hundred miles away. And I think, Chair, that's an issue for Parliament. I think the time has come to end out-of-area working and require that the local authorities where people are doing their job are the ones who licence those vehicles. So I would like to see wider guidance to local authorities and legislative change to support them in taking steps to protect the public when they're on nights out, both in terms of implementing this legislation, but also improving the safety of what goes on in and around venues on nights out.
Sonia Kumar.
What logistical challenges do you foresee in implementing Martin's Law with currently, the implementations that you already made, and for the future for sort of small operating venues and venues that have limited staff or funding? Well,
as we've said, smaller venues have been working with Manchester City Council, and the feedback is that it's a positive thing to do. Obviously, to have specific training in relation to how to lock down a venue, evacuate a venue, I think is helpful for the most serious of incidents, but more broadly, because let's be honest, venues face a wide range of incidents on an ongoing basis. There are risks to people's safety through the year. It's something that is part of the nighttime economy, and I think it's got to be proportionate. But the measures in this bill are proportionate. I would go back to that request about the mandatory training. If it's free training, why is that not in the standard tier? How does that impose a burden? Did we hear that it's an hour of a member of staff's time? I don't consider that to be burdensome, to be honest with you. I consider that to be good practice, that people are supported in their working time to access that training, to do that training. I think it clearly would help in the instance of a terrorist attack, but probably would help them more broadly in terms of awareness, situational awareness, vigilance, general good practice, I would say, in terms of running a venue, stewarding a venue, and making sure that it operates well at all times. So, I personally don't see why this threshold has been raised to 200. As you've just heard, many of your constituencies will have many venues now that are not covered, and I would put it to you, given what we've seen this year, it's as likely that an incident could happen in one of those venues as could happen in a pub that could have a capacity of 300 or 400. I don't see it to be less likely, and furthermore, I don't see it to be unnecessarily burdensome in terms of what's being asked of those places. You could even argue that it's more important that the smaller venues do this, because they will have less resource to call on in the event of an incident.
Conor Rand.
Thank you, Andy. The whole country saw how Grey and Manchester came together after the arena bombings, and we've heard already the importance of not letting the memory of that affect our day-to-day lives and how we live our lives. But I wondered if you could talk about the buy-in from local people and local communities, the importance to the people of Greater Manchester and to the City of Manchester that lessons are learned and that this is implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Rand. I mean, the point was made earlier, I think, by Mr. Bishop, I think, in relation to recommendations to the Manchester Arena inquiry. I can assure you that the Deputy Mayor is sitting behind, and the Deputy Mayor has led a whole process that is looking at implementing every single one of those recommendations to the letter, because we as I've said before, what happened on the 22nd of May 2017 has changed the city, but not in a way that was intended. It was intended to divide us, and it brought us together, as you've just recognised. And also, I guess it was intended to weaken us, but in fact it's going to leave us with stronger arrangements. And at no point in this process have I seen anything other than overwhelming public support for what Figen has called for. The public support has never been in any doubt whatsoever. I mentioned before Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. I just want to come back to this point. You may remember on the night there was confusion in the fire service about what to do, and it took a long time for Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service to arrive at the arena. And they've gone through a painstaking exercise, very difficult exercise for them actually, as to what happened and how it happened, and they are a very different organisation as a result. But I want to come back to this point. It's not clear what the role of Fire and Rescue Services is, and we, along with London, are the only two fire brigades in the country that have now put in place arrangements for all of our firefighters to have training in marauding terrorist attack and to have that capability to respond. That isn't the case with the others. And again, I had no resistance to that from the firefighters, from the Fire Brigades Union. Everybody saw it was the right thing to do. But we're now in a position where neighbouring fire and rescue services don't have that capability, and it's unclear then what happens in an instance, and it shouldn't be unclear. So I think the Greater Manchester experience is we've done and more everything that this legislation is asking, and we continue to challenge ourselves and to do more. But it has to be now standardised nationally for the reasons we've given around the nature of the threat. And the message from us is, none of this has been resisted or been too difficult to implement with our public services. There's strong public support. I come back to what I said at the start. Please, members of this committee, do not let this bill be watered down any further. If anything, it should be being strengthened. Amendments should be coming forward to strengthen it. I think the risk is that the smaller venues will become the venues that are more targeted if we leave that flank open. And I'm hoping that we won't. I think that standard tier should go back down to venues of 100 or more.
Chris Murray.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you about events and the impact you think it'll have on events. So I'm the MP for Edinburgh, and we've got the Edinburgh Festival in August, where suddenly you have 5,000 events taking place in 1 month and 50,000 tickets being sold in venues across the city. How do you think this legislation will help cities like Edinburgh, where we have like big scale events, especially when they're distributed? And I should say, actually, Edinburgh City Council is very supportive of this legislation. They recognise the power of it.
Well, thanks, Mr. Murray. We're really grateful for their support, and actually there's a lot of collaboration going on between Edinburgh and Greater Manchester at the moment, and the director of the festival was with us just last week. I've visited Edinburgh Festival in the last 3 years now, and I'm actually, left in awe really of the arrangements that are in place around the city, because of the depth of experience in Edinburgh about running major events that have many facets and many venues, and the number of visitors that come into the city. I think there's a lot to learn actually from Edinburgh City Council and the way that they manage things, and I think that should say something that they support this bill, because for those who've been to the festival, there's a whole range of venues used, aren't there, of all kinds of sizes. And I think it makes the point that I was just making a moment ago in response to Mr. Rand, that Mr. Rocker, I think it was, sorry, if the smaller venues didn't have that, they potentially would become the ones that would be more at risk and more targeted. So I think it's the whole point, isn't it? It's like the whole ecosystem of venues, isn't it? From the smallest to the biggest, proportionate, sure, not having disproportionate measures. But I think any city, when you're in my position and you look across the city region, I mean, I will feel it will cause me anxiety, I guess, if this bill goes through in its current form, and then I'll have to look at the venues that aren't covered, and I just don't think that's going to make the job of Edinburgh City Council, Manchester City Council, or any other local authority easier to go back to the question that Lindsay Farnsworth raised. It's not going to make the job of local authorities harder to have this sort of lack of clarity in terms of the arrangements. The more that they're standardised, I would say, the better.
Can I ask members of the committee, are there any further questions? Paul Wall.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks to Figen and thanks to Brendan. You all make a really powerful case for why strengthening security actually helps business. It's not just helping the public, it's helping businesses to thrive, because they can then attract people in a secure and safe environment. But at the same time, there are worries by some smaller independent live concert promoters, very small-scale people who are worried about the impact of this on them. I mean, the reason Martin went to this gig, like a lot of people go to these gigs, is because they love music. You love music. Greater Manchester's fantastic for music, and so is Manchester itself. So can you explain to us what's happened in Manchester locally to sort of reassure some of those small-scale live music people who are saying, actually, this could put us out of business, or, we're coming to this, we're not the big boys, we're not the arena. How can we cope with this, and how can we make everyone feel safe, but also not change our way of life, which is ultimately, as Brennan said, the purpose of this legislation?
It's a good question, Paul, and it does go back to the guidance to local authorities. The way we work, and I'm thinking, when I say we, I'm thinking of the leader of Manchester City Council, Deputy Mayor of Greater Manchester, Paul Dennett, so Beth Craig and Paul Dennett, people you'll know. We all love music. We are a music city region, and because of that, we get close to the venues. You'll know there's been a threat to one of our venues night and day in recent times, and at different points, we've had similar issues with other venues. We cherish this infrastructure, and we work hard to keep it. And we work hard to understand the issues that they've got and how we can work in a practical way to help them. And that's what I mean about, get close to the nighttime economy. It's critical, it's one of the things we do really well in this country, and it's a big reason why people come and visit Britain, not just for the big arenas, but for the music scene at that grassroots level as well. We've had Womex in the city last week, as you'll know. Councillor Besford, I think, has been very, very much at the heart of that, and he runs the English Folk Festival. We, like Edinburgh, often will have events that do involve the smallest and the biggest, And my point is, don't just impose things on them. You've got to sit down with them, talk with them. What can we do to help? And this is my point about Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. If you've got a capable fire service, they can go in and help. The blue light services can help provide that training, can help people comply with the measures in this bill. It's not about just leaving venues on their own, is it? Here's Martin's Law, get on with it. Oh, if it puts you out of business, that's not how it's done. We're doing it a different way. You know, you get down there, listen to them all. They'll all have different issues. Support what they do because they are important in bringing visitors to the city. So that, I'm just giving you the Manchester perspective. That's the way we go about things. The music infrastructure in the city and the sort of broader entertainment infrastructure is highly, highly valued. There was an era where a certain nightclub was just left to close and there are flats there now. Well, we don't kind of think like that these days. We protect the infrastructure and that means supporting the venues and it is tough for them. So get close to them and support them. And I appreciate times are hard, but there are blue light services everywhere that can help them raise their game from a security point of view. And I just think we can't talk ourselves into a sort of thing that it's all too big a burden. Well, I can tell you from experience, a terrorist attack is a massive burden on a city. What it does challenges everybody at every level and does ongoing. Like Figen said, Manchester will never be the same again after what happened. It has changed us, but it's strengthened us. It's made us more united. And, as I say, I don't want any other city to go through that. But the bill actually is designed to prevent people going through that. And part of what I would say is, I think the way we do it, the way Edinburgh do it, I think there's a good model there for others to look at.
Can I see any other members? In that case, if there are no further questions from members, can I thank Mayor Burnham for his evidence, and we'll move on to the next panel. Thank you. For this oral evidence session, we have until 10:50. Can the witnesses please introduce themselves for the record?
Morning, my name is Helen Ball. I'm the Town Clerk of Shrewsbury Town Council in Shropshire, and I'm also the Chairman of the Society of Local Council Clerks nationally.
Hello, my name's Keith Stevens. I'm the Chair of the National Association of Local Councils, which looks after the 10,000 parish and town councils across the country.
Thank you. I call the Minister to open questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to you both. Thank you for giving evidence to the committee. My question is for Councillor Stevens. I know that you've had a long-standing interest in the process, and as part of the pre-legislative scrutiny in the previous Parliament, I know that a number of concerns were raised around proportionality and thresholds, and also around the lack of clarity with regard to the regulator. So I'd be very grateful for your view on the changes that have been made to the bill since, and also on how receptive you think local councillors will be to those changes. Thank you.
Yes, having obviously heard what's gone before, I think as a councillor, parish councillor, I was quite pleased when the threshold was lifted to 200 because it's proportionate. And I give the simple example, I suppose, of my own parish council, where the village hall where we hold all our meetings has a capacity, I think it's 190. But I have to be honest, we rarely get 190 people at a parish council meeting. Normally it's sort of 20 people, including the councillors as a maximum. And that's where raising the threshold to 200 was sort of welcomed by, I think, a lot of councils, because it meant that the rules weren't quite as strict. But I don't think it means that parish councils and town councils won't be looking at the security of any venue that any event is taking place. I think it is important, and we always look at it. And sorry, the second part of the question was
just with regard to the extent to which local councillors will be receptive to those changes.
I think they are receptive to the changes, and I think local councils and councillors are very supportive of Martin's Law. I think they've all seen the things, and most parish councils have quite good relationships with the other security services, and we have, in my own area, we have regular monthly meetings to talk about the situation. And it's actually the police often use parish councils as almost a pulse what's going on in the village. And when there were all the problems last year, the police were in contact with us, asking to let them know if we got any rumours which, got off the ground. So yeah, very supportive.
Sonia Kumar.
Do you anticipate that certain types of community events or venues may struggle to meet the requirements due to the nature of their spaces, such as historic venues with limited security options?
I think we've had a sort of conversation with a lot of parish councils and parish clerks over the last few months, and a lot of village halls are quite distinct in where they are. So there is some concern as to how they would actually be able to enact evacuation and lockdown procedures, particularly when you've just got a large room and you may only have one entrance and one exit. So I think there is that level of concern. I think a lot of the problems that we have at the moment is it's more of the fear of the unknown, and they've read the bill and they're sort of looking at the worst case scenario. And I think we've tried to advocate as a society and also as NALC as part of our Martin's Law working group that it is a bit of a be calm and carry on, that we can do this. It's a lot of a common sense approach to it, and I think the sentiment really from our society is that it's legislation that should be welcomed, and regardless of whether there are bandings within certain buildings, we should be developing a culture of terrorism awareness. So what price is a life, I think, is the sort of the comments that a lot of clerks have said of late, in that why would somebody's life be less important if they're in a building that's got 199 people as 201? So I think it's incumbent upon, I think, our sector to try and encourage a better culture.
Chris Murray.
Thank you very much. Could I ask about the responsibility being placed on specific officers? Because as we all know, in the days after a terrorist attack, there's a lot of media attention, emotions are very high. And I wonder what it would be like for the person who might have been responsible for compliance or named to do if something isn't a very big part of their job, if they've only received limited training for it. I wonder what you think the protections would be in place for those officers to be prepared for that and to navigate that scenario.
I'll give you a bit of my perspective as a practitioner, and my involvement in that kind of terrorism management came 2 weeks after the Manchester bombings, because we were due to have an outdoor music event that was going to have 12,000 people in our park. And we were starting to get those kind of comments from the public to say, I don't think I'm going to feel safe. Can I have my money back? So it was incumbent upon us to sit down with the event organiser and their security team and counter-terrorism and the local police to put measures in place that would give the assurance of the public that they were safe. So a lot of the kind of things that were within the current bill are things that we've been doing. So in effect, me as a town clerk had to take on that kind of responsibility. I already have the responsibility under the Health and Safety at Work Act, so it's not as if it's something that is brand new to us. It's just a different vein. So, you know, and I think from our sector, I think clerks are exceptionally resourceful individuals. They have to be. They've got to have lots of plates spinning at any one time. So I think with the right kind of guidance, and it may be that it's guidance that we could work within the sector, including the Security Industry Authority, to have very specific guidance that would help our fellow clerks would be beneficial. But I think they would take it on board because they see that this is an important piece of legislation that we've got to work towards.
If I can add to that, I suppose the only thing in the bill, it would be good to have slightly more clarity on the responsibilities, i.e. if the parish council owns the land and it's let out for an event, whose responsibility? Yes, I think it's down to the parish council to make sure that the event organiser is carrying out everything per the rules. But whose responsibility is it if that person says, yes, I'll do all that, but then doesn't? And I think that's one of the slightly grey areas at the moment. It could be made clearer.
I've talked about the resourcefulness of town clerks, and we don't have clerks in Scotland. I know the officers, and they are very resourceful. And I just wonder, do you have views on obviously local authority resourcing is a huge issue, but is this adding another layer that you're concerned about, or do you think this is another responsibility that's quite capable of being absorbed in the current broad resource sort of envelope?
I think it's something that has evolved over the years. When I became town clerk in Shrewsbury 15 years ago, when we were renting out the park for an event, it used to be a case of fill in the application form, send me your public liability insurance and the cheque, and drop the keys off when you're finished, thank you very much. But now we have more stringent premises licences that require us to have to ensure that there are event plans and security plans, and that it's communicated with the emergency services and the emergency planning team. That it's become a morphed kind of role anyway that we've absorbed. So I don't really see that Martin's Law is going to add significantly to that. It just gives us, I think, a little bit more strength in the argument with event organisers that we've got legislation that is backing us.
Thanks, that's actually reassuring to hear that. Thank you.
Can I? Yes, Ben Maguire.
Well, thanks for giving your evidence today. I represent a rural constituency of North Cornwall, which has 74 parish councils. I know from experience it can be really difficult to get parish councillors to stand for these positions. Quite interested to get your views in terms of how you think these new regulations may actually potentially put off parish councillors from taking part in their local councils, if at all, obviously.
I don't think so. I think one of the issues of people coming back or standing for councillors has been standards, the standards regime, and I was pleased that it was announced that it's being looked at, and it would appear to bring back the standards regime and the recommendations of Cospill. I think that's the only reason why people haven't come forward so much. I think it is a growing problem, not just for councils, but for charities, because of red tape and things like that. But I think people will come forward, and I think people will come forward and support their parish council on issues like safety. I think all people in the village have got children, have got relatives, and they want to keep them all safe. And that's where I think parish and town councils are almost the key to safety in the community. They're the ones that know what's going on, and people follow their lead, and I think it's important.
I would agree with Councillor Stevens. I think parish councils are kind of the beating heart of a community, and The fact that they have community venues, they have parks and open spaces, and they have events in there, it adds to the culture and the dynamic of that community. And when you have those strong community infrastructure, then you're likely to have a greater mandate from people to wanting to stand. And both NALC and the Society of Local Council Clerks have a regional kind of structures. That means that you can, we can sort of cascade that kind of enthusiasm and that culture down to grassroots level.
If I could just add, I also think the parish council, a lot of parish councils are custodian trustees for their village halls, and the village halls are run by a charitable management committee. And I think it's beholding, in my view, on the parish council to make sure that all their community groups in their village, their towns, also understand the effect of Martin's Law. But it will have a cost, I have to mention. There isn't a cost on lives, but there's a lot of smaller parish councils with low precept, and the cost to them will increase, and we will need to undertake, as again has been mentioned, training programs for...
What will be the cost, sorry?
The costs, the extra time of clerk. Yeah, a lot of parishes have a clerk that works for 5-8 hours a week, and they will have to find time to do some of these things.
In terms of training? In terms of training?
Yes, in terms of training and carrying out the review, because when you carried out the review, it took quite a long time, didn't it?
Can I see any further questions from members of the committee? If that being the case, if there are no further questions from members, can I thank Councillor Stevens and can I thank Helen Ball for your evidence this morning? We will constitute the next panel. Thank you. For this oral evidence session, we have until 11:25. Can the witnesses please introduce themselves for the record? Starting with Heather Walker.
Hi, I'm Heather Walker. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Royal Ballet and Opera.
I'm Alex Beard. I'm Chief Executive of the Royal Ballet and Opera, formerly Royal Opera House.
Paul Laffan, Group Safety and Security Manager for ATG Entertainment.
Stuart Beeby, Group Operations Director for ATG Entertainment.
Thank you. I call the Minister. Can I see any other members of the committee? Oh, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. Open to all of you, and thank you for coming. But what impact will the bill have on your venues, can I ask?
Well, I think in principle, these risks are ones that we face operationally day to day. We are already on the crowded places register, and so many of the actions I think that are implied in this legislation we are already taking, and in particular, the lens through which we do that is through a risk analysis approach, with support from the counter-terrorism security advisor and indeed our specialist contractors. I think that codifying the expectations on us through reasonable and practicable, having access to support in implementing this through the relevant authorities and a regulatory body to refer to. I think in principle all of those things are positive additions. Subject, of course, to there not being any cracks in the obligations between the various actors on the one hand, and on the other, sufficient resource for the regulator to deliver their functions. So I see this as building on the practice that is already in place, and I just should just stress that we are fully supportive of the legislation. We were involved in the consultation for it, and I think we regard it as being a good thing.
From ATG Entertainment's perspective, we're a multi-site operator. Obviously, we have 64 venues across Germany, America and the UK, 33 of which are in the UK, from Torquay to Glasgow. Very similar to the Royal Opera and Ballet, we've been involved in the creation of this bill. And whilst we feel that we are on a good footing with regards to our processes and training already and are fully supportive, it's a similar message from us as well, in that if the process is too formulaic, i.e. a one-size-fits-all, right now we work with all of the security elements, be it contractors and risk assessments and the like, and our counter-terrorism colleagues in the local constabularies. The challenges that we face with running a 1,000-seat theatre in Torquay are very different to our 2 large theatres that we run in Manchester or our 10 in the West End. So very supportive, feel that we're in a good position moving forward with training and processes, but we have an eye on how formulaic it may be with the sort of, forgive me, cookie-cutter approach to it.
Regular risk assessments for venues that have changing expeditions, seasonal events or shift working or flows?
Yeah, I think for us it's we already have these processes built in. We've been doing this for a number of years to ensure that we're sort of prepared as we should be as a public space. The majority of our venues, although they are vast and wide, it's quite sort of straightforward in terms of what we do. The events themselves don't vary a great deal. It's either a play, a musical, comedy, whatever. The operation of the building doesn't alter too much, and the buildings themselves are predominantly listed large buildings. So we would expect that we would be conducting initial assessments, which we've already done, and that we'd review them at a sort of a similar frequency as we do with all of our health and safety approaches of just regular touch points, subject to any massive changes. So we don't feel that the risk assessment element would be overly onerous upon us. I think certainly for others in our industry, it could be slightly trickier where they have more dynamic spaces and second spaces. So having that resource and knowledge, I think, could be challenging. But yeah, we don't foresee it as a huge concern for ourselves.
I think one of our thoughts is that the public, I think, will need to understand how venues will operate under this bill. Because, as an example, post-COVID, when we were all opening up, we all worked very closely together to make sure that the kinds of mitigations and arrangements in place so that the public felt safe coming back into theatres were similar. So whichever theatre you went to, you saw the same sorts of things in place. I think, given the nature of risk assessing for this arrangement, which I totally agree with, it's going to mean different things for different people, and whether you have different kinds of events or the profile of your audience attending those events is quite different, will change perhaps what mitigations you put in place. So I think from the public's perspective, they will need to understand that not everybody is doing the same thing, and that might create, I guess, some concerns about just how safe one place is to another.
If I may add to that, I think where this comes back to the thing about reasonably practicable and how we apply that, so that someone's risk assessment can vary from operator to operator, person to person. So it's how much guidance there will be around the expectations, certainly, so we understand when we're weighing up that impact, likelihood, cost analysis of that reasonably practicable. Is how do we quantify that against a large operator with significant funds behind it versus a smaller operator with far less funds, which then would raise concern for me that we may inadvertently create a higher risk profile for another venue, because if we were saying ATG or the Royal Opera House spent a lot of money strengthening our own resolve, and it just makes another operator who hasn't got the same access to funds appear a more viable target.
Yeah, our principle is deter. That's the key thing. It's not defend, it is deter as the counter-terrorism strategy. So, of course, that means if there's hostile reconnaissance and you look professional and so on, if you are being targeted, then what we're saying here is that you could be pushing them along to what is considered a softer target, although actually dynamically they are complying with all the requirements of this Act as well.
So it'd be some shape and some colour around that risk assessment process, and what are some of the expected outcomes, what are the suitable and sort of understood control measures that would be pragmatic and proportionate to the risk, but also be replicable across the entire industry. So that, to the point of my colleague here, is I as a customer, if I go to see Mean Girls one day and then a ballet the next, I shouldn't be surprised that there's security, there's a similar experience from that front end.
Yeah, Tim Rocker.
I wondered if any of the witnesses had a view about the designation of the SIA as the regulator.
Well, I think the key is that they, and this obviously puts additional responsibilities on them, and therefore they need the resources and expertise to be able to fulfil those duties, and that's a big step up. So that's my number one observation.
And the time, the time to put this in place so that it's consistent and appropriate.
Yeah, certainly from our point of view, it's a good appointment. It's the logical one in terms of what they already do in the private security sector. I think our only real concern would be around their sort of ability is the wrong word, but forgive me, I'll use it. Their ability to pragmatically apply that risk assessment and that review of processes in what is quite a different industry and setting across many of live entertainment versus classic private security sector. But we're sure that will come out in their guidance as they start forming. But I think it's also, for me, it's what would be great is clarity within the bill around how they will interact sort of externally. So how will they interact with public planning? Because certainly we see as we strengthen our own four walls, if that then shifts the attack vector to externals, things like vehicle as weapon, is we have very little control over the public spaces outside of our buildings, yet we will introduce a crowd of people leaving after a show. And HVM and hostile vehicle mitigation as an example is something we always push for in planning applications, and it is very swiftly declined. I think fundamentally on the basis of cost and whether it suits the planning and aesthetic of pedestrianised areas. So it's just understanding how much power the SIA will have in enforcing, collaborating, engaging with those external bodies on behalf of both the Act and us as private entities.
If I could just add to that, I think that ensuring there are no cracks between the obligations on individual institutions, the role of the local authority, the statutory authorities, I think is absolutely key. And even when hostile vehicle mitigation is accepted as required, desirable, actually the time lag in implementing can be very considerable.
Chris Murray.
Thank you very much. We've talked a lot about the proportionality and sort of opportunity costs that come with these changes, and I just wondered if you could say a bit about what it's like in your sector. Obviously, if there was a terrorist attack, obviously that would be really awful for the venue and the people involved. But if the public more broadly didn't feel safe going to venues, would that have an impact on your sort of ability to operate? And how sensitive is your sector to those kind of fluctuations? Basically, put it another way, is the proportionality of this correct? Because the impact on your sector could be quite significant.
Heather, why don't you?
Yeah, I mean, security is both a moral and a commercial obligation for our visitors and our staff, and it's essential that the public and our staff feel safe in our building, and that's an important part of their feedback and how we keep on attracting them. I suppose the reasonable practicableness is a very subjective view, and so some, we as an example, we do bag searches for everybody who comes into the building. Some might feel that having security archers is reasonable, but we've got to balance that with the fact that we're a theatre, we're providing entertainment, this is a social space to come into with your friends and family. So I think all these things are about balance and assessment, and certainly having a CTSA to guide us through that, I think is, in our case, is extremely valuable.
Yeah. From our view, looking across the United Kingdom, it's very similar. First of all, to your point, things are affected, and there is a group thing. We can demonstrate with statistics that how long it took people to come back into places of mass gathering for great entertainment, but post-COVID, it's taken a long time. I speak as the largest operator of theatre in the UK. There will be areas, particularly in constituencies and so on, where there's still independent theatres and run by local authorities. And the challenge in live entertainment, it's very real at the moment with the cost base, national living wage, energy costs, and then just the costs of producing. It's always been a high bar in there, but those three, there is a bit of a perfect storm. So costs, unfortunately, cost is a reality that makes people look. As we've tried to paint a picture here earlier, when we talk about the formulaic, you could get the same effect by scanning the ticket, having the table, checking the bag, having another queue for bigger bags, maybe not even allowing bigger bags into your theatre. You can do all of that. You come to our theatre at the Lyceum with Disney as our partner, where we're doing 2,100 people, 8 shows a week, you will see dogs there. That doesn't mean, because I don't use dogs at the Savoy or the Princess Theatre at Torquay, that you are less safe. There is an assessment done there, but we do have to constantly manage that message, because we do customer feedback, and you're absolutely right. We will get the two bookends. You made us do a bag search and it was raining, and the inspector calls and the average age was 65 and we were out in the rain, versus you were rushing us through. I had a bag and the check seemed cursory by your security staff. So we're constantly having to balance that. But there will be a real challenge on cost, which comes back to the application. And I guess for us, it is being very clear on it needs to be effects-based in terms of how it is assessed and the mitigations you put in place, because good training and being professional are just as effective as somebody being poor and just trying to whiz everybody through an arch, which would create a lot of cost. So that formulaic piece is key, and we are constantly managing that message that these are safe spaces to be, because particularly in theatre, the average age is still higher. There is still, it is still that demographic that is, 45 plus with more disposable income, and particularly in regional theatre, your matinees will be, more retirees. So they are very receptive to trigger events.
I can't see any other members of the committee that have questions, in which case I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their evidence this morning, and that brings us to the end of our morning session. The committee will meet again at 2 p.m. this afternoon here in the Boothroyd room to continue taking oral evidence. Thank you all very much. The whip to move the adjournment.
I beg to move that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned.
The question is that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.